Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. The New Mexico sun climbed like a white-hot coin over Fort Mason Ridge, washing the parade ground in a glare that made every buckle flash and every boot print look carved into stone. Reveille had faded, but the rhythm it left behind kept beating through the bass, hum of generators, clack of rifle bolts, shouted cadence that rose and broke like waves against the desert wind. Ava Mitchell fell into rank with the others, chin level, eyes forward, the brim of her patrol cap throwing a narrow shadow across a face that looked calm even when her lungs burned. She didn't chase attention and didn't flee it, she just moved precisely, the way the manual said to move, and that quiet steadiness seemed to gather its own gravity. On the far edge of the formation, Sergeant Nathan Cole walked the line, shoulders squared, jaw tight, a clipboard tucked under one arm like it owed him answers. He didn't waste words. He let the heat and the clock and the distance do the first layer of work, then added pressure until he found the seam in someone's armor. Today, the seam he was hunting kept refusing to appear. "Keep that interval clean, Mitchell," he snapped. "Yes, Sergeant," she answered, breath steady, step exact. Captain Jordan Reeves watched from the command walkway above the motor pool, elbows on the rail, coffee cooling in his hand. He tracked the way Cole's eyes stayed on Mitchell a moment longer than they needed to, and the way Mitchell's voice never wavered when she counted reps. Reeves didn't like how the air felt, dry, electric, primed for a spark you couldn't see until it jumped. Inside HQ, Colonel Benjamin Harker skimmed an inspection checklist, red pen tapping the margins. Regional Command wanted numbers that lined up, equipment that gleamed, and training that looked like a poster. Harker wanted something harder to measure, a base that would hold when the wind hit it sideways. He'd heard whispers that Cole had been pushing the platoons harder, tightening screws that were already tight, but hard wasn't against the rules, losing the why behind hard was. On the field, the day accelerated. Ruck on, ruck off. Low crawl through grit that stuck between teeth. Buddy drags. Burpees until the horizon blurred. The sun kept rising until it felt like it was sitting on everyone's shoulders. Ava adjusted to the pace instead of trying to beat it. She kept her breathing clean, her eyes soft, her mind on the next step and nothing beyond it. A private behind her stumbled on a rut. Without breaking stride, she reached back, steadied him, and reset her line. Cole's whistle cut the air. "Hands to yourself, Mitchell. You move when I tell you." "Roger, Sergeant." The word didn't carry a challenge, it carried a fact. Cole's jaw ticked. Reeves dragged a finger along his coffee lid, leaving a dusty arc. The platoon shifted to shuttle runs with sand-filled ammo cans that chewed palms raw. Heat shimmered above the blacktop, even the crows looked tired, their shadows small and sharp. Mitchell hit her marks, turned on the ball of her foot, absorbed the weight like it belonged to her, and set it down like it didn't. Cole walked closer, boots thudding, eyes narrowed as if clarity would appear if he stared hard enough. "Louder on the count," he said. "Yes, Sergeant." "You call that loud?" "1." Her voice carried clean across the ground. Heads turned because clarity had a sound, and that was it. The squad rolled into push-ups on command, gravel biting through sleeves. Cole's count sped up. Ava kept pace, triceps shaking, back straight, sand gritting at the corners of her mouth. She didn't look left or right. She didn't look at him. She kept the math of the movement exact. The seconds stretched like wire. Reeves checked his watch and felt time run thin. In the aid station, Sergeant Paul Miller inventoried saline and gauze, listening to the cadence drift through a cracked window, hearing the tempo that tells a medic whether the day is routine or about to swing wide. He paused, just long enough to register the edge in it. Out by the helipad, dust devils spun and died. Inside the ops room, an air conditioner rattled, the only thing in the building allowed to sound nervous. Parker capped his pen and stepped to the window. From up high, the formation looked symmetrical, controlled, proud, until you knew what to look for. He saw Cole's orbit tighten around a single point. He saw Reeves stiffen on the catwalk. He saw a young soldier who refused to shrink. The drill shifted again, high knees through tires, vault the barrier, drop for mountain climbers. Cole's voice chased them, clipped, precise, a hammer trying to be a metronome. Mitchell, front and center. She moved without hurry or drag, a straight line to the mark. He looked down at her cap brim, at the sweat carved along her temple, at hands that didn't tremble even when the rest of her did. You ready for inspection? Yes, Sergeant. Prove it. The platoon felt the air thin, even the sun seemed to lean in. Reeves set his cup down. Parker's reflection ghosted across the glass. Miller snapped his kit closed. The desert held its breath the way it does right before thunder, when the sky is blue and you swear you hear it anyway. Ava squared her shoulders and waited for the next command, and everyone else waited for the thing none of them could quite name to either pass like heat haze, or finally break, and the break came with a sound so small it didn't seem possible that it could change anything. Cole's whistle clipped short, his hand cutting down as if to slice the moment in half, the command hanging unfinished. Ava's eyes stayed level, her breath held in place. Then his palm flashed and cracked across her cheek, a flat report that fell over the formation like a lid. Cap stilled. A canteen rolled, tapping twice against a boot. No one moved. Ava rocked back a fraction, caught herself, reached for nothing, then straightened and pulled her cap down with 2 fingers like she was closing a book. Permission to return to formation, Sergeant, she said, voice even but quieter than the sun. Cole didn't answer. The silence that followed him was louder than shouting. Somewhere behind the bleachers a radio operator swallowed his nerves and clicked transmit. Ops, this is parade ground, priority, possible assault between ranks. In the ops room, a tech looked up so fast his chair squealed. Reeves was already moving, boots ringing on the catwalk as he cut for the stairs. Parker didn't run, but every step he took was faster than the one before it. On the ground, a corporal found his voice and said, Mitchell, with me, and then thought better of it when he felt the weight of the air and shifted to, hold position. Time did a strange thing, it shrank. The base clock read 12:03, 3 minutes could stretch like a mile or snap like a twig. At 12:04, Reeves keyed his handset, lock training lanes, keep everyone in place, no one engages the sergeant. At 12:05, the operations chief put a call through to El Paso Regional Command. The words came clipped, professional, but the tremor beneath them was human enough. Critical incident at Fort Mason Ridge. Confirmed contact from NCO to recruit during drill. Multiple witnesses. At 12:06, rotors were already somewhere beyond the ridgeline, just a tremble in the air you feel in your teeth before you hear it in your ears. Cole dragged in a breath like a man scaling back from a ledge and found nothing to hold. The anger that had seemed like certainty a second earlier emptied out and left him with a wringing hand and 30 faces he couldn't read. Reeves reached the line, lifted his palm, and said, Sergeant Cole, with me, like it wasn't a request. Cole's mouth worked once. He nodded, turned, and walked, boots heavy, eyes on nothing. Ava stood where she'd stood, cheek burning, spine straight, counting the beats between her heart and the choppers. Miller crossed the infirmary threshold the moment the first siren sounded, a medic's habits firing before orders did. He met Ava at the edge of the field with a nod that asked a question she didn't answer. You good to walk? Yes, Sergeant. We're gonna check you anyway. Roger. They moved, 2 MPs trailing because that's how the book says you move when everything just got bigger than you are. The hello wash hit the parade ground in a dirty wind, throwing grit into eyes and sucking the heat out of the top inch of air. The doors slid open and 3 generals stepped onto the tarmac like gravity belonged to them, Major General Marcus Alden first, broad and economical, Brigadier General Sofia Torres right behind with a face that read every corner at once, and Lieutenant General Douglas Rains last, hands still at his sides until they weren't. Harker met them halfway. He didn't salute for show, he saluted because that's how you stand up when the roof comes off. "We have confirmed witness accounts and a preliminary report," he said. Alden didn't break stride. "Why is your training ground still hot?" Harker didn't blink. "It isn't. It's frozen. Torres, get me every camera angle in the ops room yesterday. Rains, lock the gates. No comms off base without clearance." The siren cut in one long tone that told every soldier exactly what to do: stop. Trucks idled into silence. Cadence died mid-syllable. A flag flapped once, loud as paper. In the med bay, Miller tilted Ava's chin with the back of two knuckles, eyes tracking swelling that already wanted to bloom. "Ice, vitals, and we're documenting. You don't have to say anything." "I know," she said, and meant it. He pressed a cold pack into her palm. "Hold this to your cheek, not your pride." She almost smiled. In the holding office, Reeves slid a form across a metal desk to Cole, who stared at it like the letters were shifting. "You're confined to quarters until directed otherwise," Reeves said. 2 MPs at the door. "You don't speak to anyone except me or the colonel." Cole signed once, pen scratching too dark. "Understood." "Do you?" Reeves asked, soft enough that the MPs couldn't hear. Cole didn't look up. "I hit her." Reeves nodded once, all the words that didn't help staying where they belonged. In ops, screens bloomed to life, grainy wide shots, a training drone's overhead path, 2 body cams that caught pieces of a whole. Torres watched the frames where power became contact and then became consequence. "Pause," she said, and the room held on the still of a hand a foot before a face and the thin line of time between them. "Discipline is process," she said to no one and everyone. "That's not process." Rains took a breath, let it out slow. "Shut down the base," he told the watch officer. "It's shut, sir." "Then make it clear." The PA crackled and carried Harker's voice across concrete and sand. "All training and movement are suspended until further notice. Platoon leaders will secure personnel accountability and await instruction. This is not a drill." The phrase had an old weight and a new meaning. Outside the wire, crows lifted and settled. Inside the aid station, Miller documented each detail because details keep liars small and the truth big. "Do you need a minute?" he asked. "I need to stand," Ava said. "Standing is a minute," he answered, and let her have it. On the apron, Alden turned to Harker. "You'll get scrutiny you don't like and attention you didn't ask for. Your people will want to manage optics. You'll manage facts." Harker's jaw worked. "Yes, sir." Torres had already drafted a witness sequence in her head. "We start with the recruit, then the squad leaders, then the sergeant. Keep them separate. No rumor loops." Rains stepped closer to the glass and looked at the parade ground, now an interrupted picture of order, and said what no one else had said yet but everyone felt. "This is bigger than a temper," he murmured. "It's a habit." Reeves stood outside the infirmary door and watched dust hang in the light like static. He had been in rooms where men bled and rooms where men lied. This felt like both, except the blood was inside people and the lies would come later. He cracked the door and stuck his head in. "Mitchell." "Sir." "You're not alone," he said. It wasn't comfort. It was logistics for the soul. She nodded, ice against her cheek, boots squared under the chair like they needed to be ready. Somewhere down the corridor a printer started spitting forms because paper is how the army makes sense of pain. Back on the field the heat finally blinked, and the horizon sharpened, and everyone who had been waiting for the thing to pass or break knew exactly which one had happened. The base didn't breathe again, it held its breath on purpose, the way you do when you're about to dive under and come up different, and that was exactly the feeling when the investigation swallowed Fort Mason Ridge whole and the surface of daily routine snapped shut over it like a seal. Doors that always stayed open were posted with MPs, radios that filled the day with chatter went precise and thin, no stray words, no filler. Torres walked the center corridor with a legal pad and a metronome in her head, building a spine for the facts, time stamps, camera angles, names matched to boots, to rank, to positions on the ground when the sound happened. Alden took the ops room like a war map, elbows on the console, eyes cutting from drone footage to body cam, listening for the rhythm underneath the noise. Raines stood very still and asked 3 questions that made the room reframe the entire morning. When did discipline stop being instruction? When did speed become escalation? When did fear get mistaken for respect? The answers weren't slogans, they were pauses in people's voices. Ava went first because Torres insisted the person hit gets to set the temperature. Miller sat in the corner, not as a witness, just a steady lamp. I complied with every order, Ava said, tone neutral. I corrected interval. I raised voice on count. I steadied a private who was about to fall so the formation wouldn't collapse. I asked permission to return to formation after contact. Did you speak with intent to challenge? Torres asked. No, ma'am. Did you intend to embarrass him? No, ma'am. Torres let silence follow the answers long enough for their shape to hold. Squad leaders came next, one by one. You could hear who had learned to talk around pain and who had decided to face it. It was quick. He's been tight for weeks. We thought he'd just bark and walk away. Reeves gave his statement last of the officers, plain and exact. He had observed focus narrowing, he had moved to interrupt, he had removed Cole without incident, he had notified Harker and locked lanes. Cole sat at a metal table in a room with a clock you couldn't hear and said the thing that mattered and the thing that didn't fix it. I hit her. Torres didn't blink. Why? He stared at his hands like they were evidence. I felt the unit slipping. So you took your control back by force? Yes, ma'am. That is not control, she said, and it was not a rebuke, it was a definition. Outside, the desert did its noon trick of pretending time was a flat line. Inside, printers sang their dry song, report pages stacking into a topography of cause and effect. Harker convened a command huddle in the map room, the smell of dust and dry marker ink mixed with something like shame. Alden laid out the lanes, adjudication for the incident, assessment for the culture that let it get that close to normal. Raines said the part that felt like pulling a pin. This doesn't end in a paragraph about one man. Reeves watched heads dip in agreement because everyone understood what he meant, this would cost more than a headline. By late afternoon, ops flagged a ripple on the perimeter road, 2 vans, a tripod, a woman in a windbreaker doing live shots to a lens. No badges inside the gate would confirm anything, but gossip travels in waves you can't chart, and some wave had found them. Harker ordered public affairs to hold the line, acknowledge lockdown, deny details, commit to process. They'll say we're hiding, someone muttered. We're doing the work, Harker said, almost to himself. Infirmary air cooled as the sun bled back toward the ridge. Miller came in with fresh ice and a legal-sized form. Last set of vitals and a documented photograph, he said softly. You can look away. I won't, Ava said, and didn't. The flash was small, but it felt like a bell rung in a chapel, record, not spectacle. When Torres returned to ops, she had a list of recommendations already penciled in the margins of her notes: immediate relief of the NCO pending court-martial, mandatory ethics retraining for all training cadre, a confidential channel directly to brigade for recruits reporting abuse, quarterly climate surveys analyzed by outside counsel. Alden added hard edges, timeline, oversight officers, a freeze on any certification ratings until the new frame held. Raines didn't write, he walked the perimeter glass like a pastor looking over pews, measuring the gap between what they said they were and what they had been. At 1800, Harker addressed company leadership in the auditorium, a room built for briefings and pep talks but now serving as a place you tell the truth in public. You will hear that this is an overreaction, he said. If that thought comes, let it pass. We're not overreacting. We're recalibrating. The words settled like a weight correctly distributed. Reeves left the auditorium into a corridor of long shadows and saw two privates reading the posted notice about witness procedures. Their eyes tracked the lines like they were learning a foreign language that might become native if they practiced. He wanted to tell them something useful, so he said the only useful sentence he had. The system works when we make it work. They nodded like the sentence was a ration they'd have to stretch. Night lit the base a different way, floodlights ironed the edges of buildings, and the sky finally cooled enough to remember stars. The three generals met again with Harker at a table bare except for water and paper. Torres summarized the threads, Alden named the decisions, Raines blessed the arc with one more set of questions couched as certainties. We will try a man, he said. We will also try our methods. Both must answer. Harker felt the prick behind the eyes you get when the thing you love is shown a mirror. Yes, sir. Before midnight, orders were cut, charges drafted under Article 128, confinement maintained, tribunal scheduled on base to prevent spectacle from distorting substance. Public Affairs drafted a holding statement that avoided euphemism. Reeves walked the empty parade ground once, hearing the day replay by echo, count cadence, whistle, silence, rotor chop, and he let each sound pass through without editing it into something kinder. In the barracks, a young private wrote home without using the word slap because he didn't have to. His mother would hear it between the lines. In the clinic, Miller checked on Ava one last time and found her sitting upright, cap on her knee, boots lined under the chair like guards. You sleeping at all? He asked. After, she said. After what? After we do the part we have to do. He nodded because that was the answer of a soldier and a citizen at once. Outside, the wind moved a scrap of caution tape along the fence like a tiny flag. Inside, the investigation had a spine and a heartbeat, and the base, holding its breath on purpose, felt the first pull of the dive giving way to the rise came at dawn on court-martial day, when Fort Mason Ridge woke to a colder light and a stricter quiet, the kind that makes every footstep sound like intention. The auditorium had been turned into a courtroom, flags at the back wall, long table at the front, rows of chairs that creaked like they knew what was coming. MPs checked badges, then checked eyes. Cole sat beside a defense counsel with his hands flat, the skin across his knuckles rough and pale, the sleeves of his uniform stripped of anything that used to speak for him. Reeves stood along the side aisle, not as a participant but as a witness to the whole, a ledger in boots. Harker took a seat near the aisle, jaw set, shoulders square, a man prepared to accept whatever the mirror said. At precisely 0900, Alden, Torres, and Raines entered like gravity adjusting the room. The crowd rose and sat as one. Raines' voice carried without hurry. This court-martial is now in session. The charge read plain because plain hurts truest, Article 128, assault upon a subordinate. Guilty, Cole said, and the word felt both heavier and lighter than anyone expected, like a pack set down on stone. No one applauded the honesty, they just adjusted to it. The government called witnesses in an order that made narrative, not theater, squad leaders first, then Reeves, then finally Ava. Each account fit the next like rails laid to a destination nobody wanted to reach. When Ava took the stand, the room practiced breathing again. Miller sat in the back, hands folded, a presence more than a role. Torres asked questions that were doors, not traps. State your name for the record. Private Ava Mitchell. Describe your actions on the parade ground immediately prior to contact. Corrected interval, raised volume on count, steadied a private to preserve formation integrity, complied with orders. After contact. Requested permission to return to formation. Her voice did not climb or dip, it held. The defense asked the necessary things and then stopped, as if every additional word risked breaking the clarity. Raines leaned forward just enough. Private, what do you want this court to understand? A ripple moved through the room because it wasn't a legal question, it was a human one. Ava looked at the table where Cole sat, then at the flag behind the tribunal, then at no one. That discipline is not force, she said. That we can be strong without making people small. And that one wrong doesn't cancel a career, but it does demand an answer. The room went still in that specific way truth makes rooms still. Cole stood when it was his turn. He didn't read, he spoke like a man who knows the script only works if it's real. I taught fear because I confused it with respect. I hit her because I confused my panic with her defiance. I was wrong. I don't ask to keep what I had. I ask that what I've learned not be wasted. He sat as if the chair had to volunteer to hold him up. The panel withdrew, time stretched and thinned, the way it does when you're about to hear a verdict that will rename the rest of your days. Outside, a boom mic bobbed above the fence line like a curious bird. Inside, maybe 15 minutes passed, maybe 50, no one checked their watch because measurement felt rude. When the generals returned, Alden read first, voice level. On the charge of assault upon a subordinate, guilty as charged. Torres continued, clean and exact. Sentence, dismissal from service under dishonorable discharge, confinement for 12 months, mandatory completion of leadership and ethics reform program under oversight. Rains finished, the cadence almost pastoral. This judgment is punishment, but it is also instruction. Justice without the chance to grow becomes theater. We do not do theater with people's lives. Cole nodded once, eyes clear in a way that looked like pain being honest. The gavel struck wood, a breath left the room like a single body had been holding it. By noon, the base gates faced a half-circle of lenses and questions. Harker stepped to the podium with Alden and Torres flanking, Rains astride behind. The statement was short because short is hard and therefore right. Fort Mason Ridge shut down operations because our values were questioned by our actions. Today we held ourselves accountable in full view. Discipline is not violence. Leadership is not intimidation. We will train differently because we must be who we say we are. The words traveled. You could feel them hit the cameras and push outward like heat does at a distance. Reporters shouted follow-ups. Was this systemic? Will there be more removals? Harker didn't dance. We are examining our culture with the same rigor we apply to our tactics. Where we find failure, we will fix it. Back inside, the auditorium emptied slowly, the way churches do after weddings and funerals, when people don't know how to stand up without feeling like they're leaving something necessary behind. Reeves stepped to the aisle as Ava came off the stand. He didn't say proud because that's a word that belongs to parents and parades. He said, thank you, and meant it like an oath. Miller caught her by the door with a water bottle and a look that asked nothing. She took both. Cole paused under MP escort as Ava passed, and for 1 second that could have gone 1,000 ways, their eyes held. He didn't speak, he bowed his head the way men do when what they have left is contrition. She nodded once, not a pardon, not a decor, just recognition that a road existed from this moment forward and each of them had to walk a different part of it. By afternoon, orders moved through the base like clean wind. Training freeze extended. Ethics modules rolled out on emergency timeline. Anonymous reporting channel stood up with direct oversight to brigade. Reeves briefed platoon leaders on how to talk to their soldiers without explaining anything away. We're not minimizing, he said. We're modeling. Harker signed the last of the immediate directives and stared at the new plaque draft on his desk, a simple line for the main gate once operations resumed, strength through honor. He didn't add flourish. He just circled it and wrote one word in the margin, yes. As the sun dropped behind the ridge, the base felt different, not lighter exactly, but aligned, the way a spine feels when it's set right after a long ache. Alden walked the quiet of the parade ground and said to nobody, we didn't lose face. We found it. Torres, at the ops room window, closed her notebook over a list that had more beginnings than endings. Rains looked up at the flag and gave a small nod that meant trajectory, not victory. Night came on clean. The floodlights hummed. From the infirmary door, Ava stepped into the cooling air and listened to the silence, which wasn't fear anymore, it was room to build, to teach, to stand. And for the first time since the heat turned hard, Fort Mason Ridge felt like a place where the next order of business could finally be the future, and the future arrived in blunt instruments first: policy drafts, training schedules rewritten overnight, a new inbox marked confidential reporting, direct to brigade, and a banner rolled out at the main gate that read strength through honor in letters so plain they felt like a promise. Harker signed the activation memo for Operation Honor Code before sunrise, then walked the parade ground with Reeves and pointed where new blocks of instruction would live: leadership by example in the morning, ethics under pressure after chow, scenario drills that tested judgment as hard as muscle. Torres sent over a curriculum that didn't sound like a slideshow, it sounded like work. Teach them to interrupt escalation, she wrote in the margin. Teach them that control without respect is performative and will fail at the first hard wind. Alden handled the logistics with a cold efficiency that reassured the doubters: additional instructors on TDY, outside assessors in plain polos, a cadence of audits tied to real consequences. Raines kept the horizon in view. He walked into rooms, said little, and left people understanding the difference between a cycle and a shift. The base breathed in new oxygen. Squad leaders ran drills that looked familiar until they didn't: a boot slipping on gravel, a voice hitching under stress, a hand reaching. This time the correction wasn't volume, it was pause, reframe, proceed. Reeves pulled a Bravo Company formation into a horseshoe and told a story that made a dozen heads tilt forward: the first time he realized yelling got him compliance and presence got him commitment. One will work for a minute, he said. The other will work when minutes stack into years. Miller took his medic team through a different kind of rep: how to document without turning people into cases, how to say, "you're safe," without using the words. In the infirmary mirror, Ava touched the last faintening shadow on her cheek and saw only what remained: steadiness. Her days shifted from being the center of an incident to being a reference point. Recruits watched her without staring, the way you watch a compass needle to make sure you haven't drifted. She didn't give speeches. She showed up to every block like everyone else, took notes like a private, asked the one question that made a staff sergeant rethink his own answer. When the invitation from Senator Evelyn Rhodes arrived on Harker's desk, seal crisp, language measured, it asked for testimony before the Defense Oversight Committee, not to relitigate, but to codify what had gone wrong, what had worked, and how to protect the next soldier who didn't have a camera, a witness, or the words ready on her tongue. Harker read it twice, then walked it to Ava. "Your call," he said. She didn't say yes out of pride or no out of fear, she said yes because it felt like part of the work. The week before the hearing, press trucks hovered beyond the fence line like weather. Public affairs kept their lane tight. Harker took one podium hit and left the rest alone. "We are training," he said. "If you want sound, you'll have to record the silence where old habits used to live." Back inside the wire, the honor code modules ran hot. In one classroom, a staff sergeant stopped mid-sentence as a young private raised his hand and described a pattern in his last unit that had felt normal then and wrong now. The room didn't flinch. They diagrammed it on the whiteboard: where authority turned into leverage, where leverage became threat, where a pause could have saved a dozen small harms before they accumulated into one big one. Reeves collected those diagrams and tacked them along a hallway. Walking it felt like moving through a museum of what not to repeat. Torres flew in for 2 days, sat in the back of 3 blocks, and afterward told Harker, "You're not polishing optics, you're changing muscle memory." Alden nodded at numbers that began to mean something: the drop in corrective PT used as punishment, the rise in peer intervention reported without retaliation. Raines visited at dusk, watched platoons move through a decision game on the parade ground, and said only, "Keep the game hard," which everyone understood to mean, keep it honest. In a low-security facility 3 states away, Cole began his own curriculum with a clean notebook and the shoulder-stooped posture of a man who knew he'd spend a long time learning how to be smaller in the right ways. The program wasn't a lecture, it was friction. He sat across from former trainees who spoke without heat about the day's fear had been the air, and he replayed the instant his hand had turned into policy. He wrote the sentence 3 times: I mistook panic for defiance, until the words lost their shine and kept only their weight. His letter to the base was short and unsentimental: I will not ask to return. I will ask to be useful to the principal that removed me. Ava read that line twice and did not feel vindication. She felt a straight line between consequence and meaning. The morning she flew to Washington with Harker and Reeves, the base gathered on the apron without ceremony. No brass band, no speeches, just nods you give to people who are going to carry your words into a room you'll never see. Capitol Hill was marble and cameras and staffs that move like weather. Senator Rhodes kept her opening statement narrow. This is about reinforcing what we already claim to value. When Ava spoke, she used the same tone she used on the range: steady, specific, free of theater. She described a training day, a decision cascade, a method that cracked because it had been hollowed by habit, and a response that worked because people chose facts over face. Rhodes asked the question the country wanted. What keeps this from being a one-base story? Repetition, Ava said. Of the right things. After the hearing, reporters shouted names like they were passwords. She didn't slow. Reeves took her elbow once, lightly, the way you keep a teammate in your peripheral. Back at Fort Mason Ridge, modules continued, gates stayed boring, and the banner at the entrance looked less like a sign and more like an address. Harker approved a small plaque for the auditorium: we will be who we say we are. He said it low enough that a private could touch it on the way out. In the evening, the bass sounded different. There was still cadence and metal and dust, but underneath it ran a chord you could almost name: confidence that didn't lean on fear. Reeves stood on the catwalk, coffee cooling again, and watched a squad run a scenario that would have broken them a month ago. It didn't. They paused, they reset, they moved. Miller walked past with a clipboard and didn't need to say anything to be part of the reason why. As the sun dropped and the ridge turned purple, Ava crossed the parade ground alone and listened to the quiet. It wasn't empty. It was space. Space for the next difficult choice to be made correctly, space for the next young voice to be heard before a hand had to speak for it, space for an institution to hold the weight of its name without grinding down the people who carry it. The future didn't arrive with a headline. It arrived with a checklist, a class, a conversation, a rule enforced without breaking anyone, and the slow, plain satisfaction of work that, finally, matched the words on the gate, and those words kept proving themselves in small, ordinary ways that stacked into something you could trust: an instructor pausing when his voice climbed, a squad leader choosing to ask before ordering, a private raising a hand to say, "That feels wrong," and not paying for it later. Weeks turned into months, and Fort Mason Ridge took on a new shape without changing its bones. Reveille still cracked the morning clean, flags still snapped against desert sky, boots still hit earth with the old certainty, but the current under all of it had shifted from fear to purpose, from compliance to commitment. Harker walked the line most mornings, coffee in one hand, pen in the other, initialing forms that used to be routine and now felt like part of the promise. Reeves kept to his rails on the catwalk, a quiet sentinel who had learned that presence travels farther than volume. Miller updated protocols so a visit to the infirmary felt less like being processed and more like being seen. And Ava moved through each day like a steady line you could lay a ruler to: range, class, scenario, debrief, never performing heroics, always doing the exact thing right in front of her with a steadiness that made other people steadier. Operation Honor Code shed its newness and became muscle memory. Outside assessors rotated through with laptops and neutral eyes. Alden liked their numbers mostly because they confirmed what you could see if you looked: fewer corrective PT punishments masquerading as leadership, more peer interventions catching problems at the start, reporting channels used and respected. Torres returned twice, sat quietly in the back, and afterward told Harker that the difference was visible in how the silence in a room behaved: no longer brittle, no longer bracing for impact. Rains came at dusk when the light made the ridge purple and said only, "Keep leaving space for decisions," which had become his way of telling a place to keep its soul. One morning an SUV rolled past the gatehouse with visitor tags and two MPs who didn't have to pretend they didn't recognize the passenger. Cole, on supervised release, cleared to meet with training staff as part of his program. No ceremony, just a schedule block, a sign-in, a walk across ground that remembered him. Reeves met him halfway, offered a handshake that was firm but not absolving. "You here to talk or to watch?" Reeves asked. "Both," Cole said. They stood off to the side as a squad ran a decision drill through a chain of commands: a stumble, a misread, a pause, a reset, a cleaner run. Cole's eyes tracked the moment where his old reflex would have snapped the air, and he watched the new reflex keep the air usable. Later in a small classroom, he spoke to 8 instructors without posture. "I used fear because it was quick," he said. "Quick breaks when it's heavy. Make it hold." No one clapped, no one needed to. He left without asking to stay, a man who understood that returning is not the same thing as belonging. The base kept moving forward because forward is a practice. The new sign finally went up at the gate: strength through honor, letters cut from a metal that catches morning light and throws it back unshowy. Parker had the plate installed just low enough for a hand to touch. On the first afternoon, a private did, not out of ritual but because the words felt like something you could check against your day. News cameras got bored and left to chase louder stories. A few magazines ran retrospective pieces with headlines that tried to make a single moment carry all the weight. None of them were wrong, but none of them captured how change actually lived. Spreadsheets and briefings, a captain rewriting a block of instruction for the 5th time because the first 4 didn't land, a medic training corporals to say, "We'll figure it out," in a tone that means it. In the auditorium, a small plaque was mounted along the exit: "We will be who we say we are." Ava touched it once on a Tuesday without meaning to and realized that, somewhere between the worst sound on a summer day and the first honest sentence in a courtroom, she had become part of the place that was teaching her. Senator Rhodes visited in plain clothes and sat in the second row for a leadership lab, then walked the length of the diagram hallway where Reeves had posted the whiteboard maps of old failure patterns and new intercepts. "You can tell when a policy is alive," she said, and it wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. Before she left, she found Ava by the door and said, "You did the rare thing, you made a government paper feel like a person." Ava shook her head. "We did," she said, and meant the whole base. As heat bled out of another day, the parade ground held a formation that wasn't on the calendar. It wasn't a ceremony so much as a check-in turned into a small moment worth keeping. Parker stepped forward with fewer words than usual. "We're not perfect," he said, "but we're current." He nodded to Reeves, who nodded to the ranks, and that was it, the kind of thing that matters more because it doesn't demand you look at it. After, Ava crossed the ground alone. She stopped in the center where gravel remembers more footsteps than memory can carry and lifted her eyes to the flag. Wind moved it, not dramatically, just enough to make the fabric work for its altitude. She thought of the count on a blistering noon, the crisp yes that repaired a line, a hand that fell and a base that rose, a courtroom where guilt sounded like a door closing and reform sounded like a door staying open, a sentence that punished and instructed, a program that turned remorse into labor. She thought of Cole driving away and not looking back because it wasn't his place to look back from. She thought of Miller's quiet, of Torres' spine of facts, of Alden's logistics that made the invisible hold, of Rain's short blessings that kept pointing at better. She didn't rehearse any lesson, she just let the simplest one land: when the method matches the mission, people can stand taller without standing on each other. She raised a salute that belonged to no person in particular and to everyone who had chosen the harder thing. The dusk caught the brim of her cap and drew a thin line of light across it. Somewhere behind her, a class bell chimed, a page turned, a pen clicked, a door closed softly. Nothing dramatic. Everything important. The base settled into evening with a sound that used to be mistaken for silence and now read as room. Room for the next recruit to learn without flinching, room for the next leader to correct without breaking, room for a promise to be kept not in speeches but in shifts. And when the floodlights lifted the edges of buildings into the clean geometry of night, Fort Mason Ridge looked exactly like what its sign said: strong because it chose honor first, ready because it remembered that discipline without dignity is just noise, steady because a young soldier stood her ground once and an institution decided to move toward her instead of away.